I've always felt like I was falling behind, trying so hard, yet never quite getting there. For so long, I thought my failures defined me. Mistakes were all I could see. Every time I failed, I wondered, what was wrong with me? Why couldn't I get things right? But I reached a point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something had to change. One day, I asked myself a question. At first, it seemed simple. It didn't sound like anything special. But when I really sat with it, the weight of it hit me. What if failure isn't the end? What if it's just part of the process? At first, I couldn't understand it. Failure is supposed to be a dead end, right? When you fail, that's the end of the story. Or at least, that's what I thought. But then I started to think deeper. What if failure wasn't something to avoid at all costs? What if it wasn't about being perfect or always succeeding? What if failure was something I needed to experience in order to grow? That's when the shift began. What if every time I failed, I was actually moving forward? What if each mistake was teaching me something, and instead of seeing failure as a sign that I wasn't good enough, I could see it as proof that I was trying? I asked myself, what if failure wasn't the opposite of success? What if it was part of success? What if I needed to fail to succeed? I started looking at the greats, the people I admired, and every single one of them had failed. But what separated them from me was how they saw failure. They didn't see it as the end, they saw it as part of the journey, a stepping stone to where they wanted to go. For the first time, failure wasn't a setback. It wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign that I was pushing myself. It was a sign that I was trying new things. It was a sign that I was growing. At that moment, I realized something important. I had been holding myself back by fearing failure. I had been avoiding risks, avoiding challenges, because I was terrified of failing. But in doing so, I was also avoiding growth. That question, that one simple question, opened my eyes. It didn't immediately solve everything, but it made me see failure in a completely different light. It wasn't the end, it was part of the process, and that's when I started to embrace it. Once I started to see failure as part of the process, everything began to change. I no longer feared failure. I no longer saw it as something to avoid at all costs. Instead, I saw it as a necessary part of growth. At first, it wasn't easy. Even though I had shifted my perspective, I still felt afraid of making mistakes. I was still unsure. But each time I failed, I remembered the question, what can I learn from this? Instead of thinking, I've failed, I'm not good enough, I started asking myself, what does this failure teach me? What can I do differently next time? It wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about learning from it. And that made all the difference. The more I allowed myself to fail, the more comfortable I became with the idea. Each failure didn't feel like a defeat anymore. It felt like a lesson. It felt like progress. Because I knew I was learning something new each time, I began to realize that success wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about learning from them. It was about staying in the game, even when things didn't go as planned. And that's when I truly embraced the idea of failing forward. I wasn't failing and staying stuck. I was failing and moving forward step by step. Each failure was another piece of the puzzle. Each failure brought me closer to where I wanted to go. It wasn't about how many times I fell. It was about how many times I got back up. Every time I failed, I asked myself, what can I do better next time? That's how I kept moving forward. I kept improving, I kept learning, and slowly, I started to see the results. Over time, I realized that every failure was actually progress. Because each time I failed, I was getting closer to my goals. I was getting better at what I was doing. I was gaining experience and insight that I wouldn't have if I hadn't failed. So now, I don't fear failure. I welcome it, I embrace it as part of my journey. Because I know that failure doesn't stop me, it pushes me forward, and that's what I want you to know. Failure isn't the end, it's the beginning of something new, it's the path to growth, and if you can learn to embrace it, failure will become your greatest ally. So the next time you fail, don't beat yourself up. Don't think you're not good enough. Instead, ask yourself, what can I learn from this? How can I use this to move forward? And that's how you will grow. That's how you will succeed.